For being here so early in the morning. Well, this is going to be the agenda of today. I'm going to start with the first presentation of market analysis and opportunities in Europe. And then Uriol is going to follow up with the next three presentations, I'd say. So basically my presentation, I'm going to start just presenting just briefly the device that we are testing in this project. In this case, with CA, PHP, and different partners of the project, we are testing the detect tool in two of the tests that are already commercialized by NG Biotech, the Carbo5 and the CTXM Multi. I just put the specific mechanisms in case some of you don't know them. And then we're also testing three different prototypes that we currently are not selling any test for those, which are the Ban-A-Ban-B for vancomycin resistance, the Acineto for the OXA23 of Acinetobacter, and the 3GC that puts together the CTXM Multi and an activity line for the cephalosporins. As for the market analysis, first, just showing you this graph that basically shows throughout the history when the different antibiotics were developed, and then in the same color when the first resistance to that antibiotic was found. As you can see, it was not many years after the appearance of the antibiotic, and you can see it's been 6 years since the last antibiotic was brought up to the market, the ceftazidime avibactam, and that there's already resistance to that antibiotic. This graph is just to show what's been discussed yesterday, that in the end, besides rapid diagnostic, which will help us choose which antibiotics should we use in each case, there's also a need for new antibiotics, new molecules to appear, to be able to treat those bacteria that currently are multi-resistant, pan-resistant to all antibiotics. And here in this table, we show for which antibiotics we are currently detecting resistance. You can see that for vancomycin, it's the Ban-A-Ban-B that we are testing in this project. Then there's all the beta-lactams, the carbapenems, third-generation cephalosporins, and the colistin resistance, for which at NG Biotech we have a test, which has not been turned into a tech. Then, just starting more into the market itself, in this, I'm also going to use the O'Neill report and the ECDC data that's been shown yesterday. Basically, you can see that in the O'Neill report in 2014 in UK, they showed that the deaths in 2050 due to AMR would be of 10 million, which due to COVID, we are not sure if this is going to increase or decrease. And then to the right, there's this graph showing that as resistance increase, the ratio of empiric therapy that's effective, it's going to start decreasing. And then there's just this slightly increase of the number of antibiotics available. But as you can see, if the number of antibiotics is not increasing a lot, the success of the empiric therapy is going to just start decreasing as the prevalence of resistance increase, which is something logical. And then, which is why rapid diagnostics are so important to help doctors know as early as possible which antibiotic is going to be the one that works for each patient, as opposed to just having empiric therapy during more time. And this is just a map showing the mortality due to AMR in the different regions. This is due to different causes, such as prevalence or the politics of each country, the availability of antibiotics, the over-the-counter antibiotics that are used. And in the end, it's both politics and the economic factors of each country, which leads to the mortality being so different in the different regions of the world. And then starting more into Europe itself, here it's the graph shown by the ECDC 2018, which shows for Klebsiella pulmonale how many bacteria were fully susceptible to antibiotics, how many were resistant to one antibiotic group, which one was resistant to more antibiotics, to 2 antibiotics groups, and the one that were resistant to 4 antibiotic groups. As you can see, different countries in Europe have different prevalence of resistance, And the graph shows that for some countries it's really problematic, as there was only 20% of the bacteria that were fully susceptible, and for Romania, for example, there was 20% of the bacteria that were resistant to more than 4 groups of antibiotics. Here there's the maps that were shown by Jordi yesterday, showing in this case Escherichia coli and Klebsiella, the prevalence of resistance to carbapenems. As you can see, for Escherichia coli, the prevalence is low. For Klebsiella, it's higher, specifically for Italy and the eastern countries. And then the same map for third generation cephalosporins. As you can see, the prevalence is higher in this case. In this case also, Klebsiella has a higher prevalence than Escherichia coli. But it's also important to know that the clinical importance of Klebsiella and Escherichia coli is different. The number of deaths caused by one and the other is not the same. So besides prevalence, it's also important to take into account the mortality of each of those bacteria. And then in the following map, there's this map for some of the new tests that we are testing in the detect tool. The Acinetobacter for the Acineto test, the Oxa23. And then to the right, Enterococcus faecium, resistance to vancomycin for the test BEN-A1B. In this case, it's very important to know that besides being, on one side, there's a clinical importance, which you can see that prevalence is high for both Acineto and then for resistance to vancomycin at the east of Europe. But for us, for NG Biotech and for other diagnostics company, it's also very important to know how many cases of those bacteria happens, because for clinicians it's very important to have a diagnostic that works. But for us, we have to balance other things. In the end, sometimes it's a balance of developing a diagnostics, even if you know it's not going to be very profitable, just because it's needed in the market. But the cases of Acineto, as it was being discussed yesterday, are low. There are not a lot of cases. So developing this test, for us, it's not going to be as profitable, let's say, as the Carba5, as there are a lot more tests of Carba5 than there will be, for example, for the Acineto test. And then here, there's a recent paper that published the coproduction of carbapenems in the different organisms. As you can see, the coproduction of KPC and BIMP is the most frequent. When there's OXA48, there's NDM. And then, well, as is logical, when there's NDM, the most is OXA48, as in the second graph. So then I'm going to move more into where can the detect tool be used in Europe, more workflows and different technologies that are in the market. Here, just a very simple graph showing that even if we say rapid tests, the question is rapid from when. It's a 50-minute test, but when is it used? In this case, our current tests that we sell are normally used after colonies, after the AST for confirmation, or from subcultures just before the AST. And in this case, the detect tool would be used from positive samples, either from positive blood cultures, urines, or rectal swabs in general. And then we are testing the respiratory samples to see if it could also be done. Here there's another graph showing slightly the same, but also with the different technologies that are used at the different times. In this case, the detect tool will also be used after the gram staining, while our current tests that we sell, just the cassettes that we currently sell, are normally used after subculturing. In this case, and I'm going to use now a couple slides from Professor Rosolini. He presented them in ECMET. You can see in the left the current usage of our cassettes directly from bacterial cultures. You can see that after either a subculture or rapid subculture, the bacteria is identified, and then it's after that our tests are done. On the right, there's the graph from direct samples. In red, I marked where the detect tool could be used. That's right after, for blood, that's right after incubation. And then for the specimens, the incubation would not be needed. And then normally we understand that as a confirmation from isolated colonies, other tests would be done just to confirm, as it's normally done, the standard techniques that are currently used nowadays. And here I presented the current workflow used in the UK. As you can see, I have marked in red where the detect tool could be used. That's directly from positive samples. And then here in the UK, they recommend to use the test twice in the same workflow. At the top, it's directly from positive samples, in which the detect tool would be a perfect fit. And then after the AST, they recommend to also do another test in which our cassettes that we sell nowadays would be used. So in the end, in the same workflow, we could use the detect tool and the cassette for one patient, let's say. And then, well, this is a graph that comes from the report that I wrote to the left, the UK Standards for Microbiology Investigation, which is a previous report from 2020, I think. 2020 or 2019. It was right when COVID appeared, and then it's a report that might have gone not unnoticed. And then here, it's what some people call devices such as the detect tool. They call them molecular antibiograms, which in the end, as you can see here, as you can read here, basically the objective is detecting resistant mechanisms at the molecular level, which is what the lateral flows do, and uses information as proxy for the antimicrobial susceptibility profiling, and then modifying the clinical decision based on that. In these two images, you see, for example, a case in which a bacteria is tested positive for KPC, and then this is not an AST, but in the end, it also gives you information regarding what can be presumed. It's, for example, it's presumed resistance to all other beta-lactams, including carbapenems, as it's resistance to KPC, and then presumed susceptibility to the new anti-KPC agents. And then for the other agents, you just don't know. So even if it's positive for KPC, there's a lot of information that you still don't know. But there's also, using the information that you know from the table on the right, there's a lot of information that you do know, that you can already modify the therapy based on that. Here, for example, you can see it's for the same case of the same supposed patient. To the right, you can see the information that you get from the detector, for example, compared to the information that you will get 2 days later from the AST. You can see that in the end, the information from the right, there's less information, but it's way earlier. So in the end, even if you don't have all the information, you can already start adapting the treatment. And then when you have the full AST, you can just finalize this optimization of the treatment. And then as for market opportunities, here there's just it's not an exhaustive table, but there's a table that shows the big players in this field. You can see most of the players are in PCR, in molecular diagnostics. There's Cepheid, Abbott, Obgen, and then there's the Bruker, both for Malditov, let's say for identification or for detection of resistance, and bioMérieux. And then there's players with other technologies such as accelerated diagnostics that was mentioned yesterday, and T2 Biosystems. And there's some technologies that already do similar things to what we are developing here with the detect tool, which are able to test directly from positive samples, being blood or being a urine or rectal swab, but they have some problems. For example, the problems would be the price of those technologies, both for having the machine, implementing the machine, and the maintenance, and the price per test. Or that if they have a good accessibility, meaning if the price is low, they can only detect the activity of resistance. They can only say it's resistant or not, but they cannot detect the specific resistance, the specific mechanism of resistance. On the other side, they have some pros also. Even if they are expensive, they have same-day results, which is the same as we are doing with the detect tool. They have high accuracy with detection of specific carbapenem genes, and they are endorsed and they are the gold standard. Most of those pros are the same as we have with the detect tool. We have same-day results and a very good accuracy, and we managed to not have the cons that those technologies have. The price will be way lower. will not have a big machine that will need maintenance or a big in-front purchase. So in the end, we're having a diagnostic that will have the same pros and will not have the problems of the current technologies. In this graph, for example, we can see when the technologies are used, if technologies are used directly from without the subculture step, or which one are used from the subculture step. You can see that some of them can be used both from without and both with a subculture step. And in the end, it's each laboratory that chooses how to work. For example, as you were explaining yesterday, the workflow, for example, from Jorde Hearing Clinic or Thierry in France, it's different, just because they have their specific workflows and their specific preferences. But you can see, for example, MALDI-TOF can be done from the bacterial pellet or from the subculture, which in the end is an important thing to know for each of the laboratories that we approach with the detector, as they will be using it from one case or the other. They will just be using the detector differently. And to finish, I just put the workflows that we are using for the clinical study, which in the end emphasizes what I just mentioned now. In the end, MALDI-TOF for identification is a very important thing to know how the laboratories use it, because in the end, if they use it one way or the other, we really have to know how they do it, because it will just modify the way that we present this device to those laboratories. In the end, this will be the same for urines. If they have the flow cytometry or they do not, they will just use it differently. And for rectal swabs, for screening, it's just going to be if the results of our clinical trial show that it's better to do it with incubation or without. And well, this was it for my short presentation this morning.